There's a lot of things that we're going to cover today. Let's start with a review. Last week, we heard more about Matthew Kelly's conversion story. His spiritual mentor, John, challenged him to go to nursing homes and to visit the sick and lonely. Matthew learned that when we serve people in need, it's not always easy, but God blesses us and them. There is nothing more appealing than getting to be an agent of God's unconditional love in the world. But your point that, well, when we apply this to real life, when we apply Jesus' words to real life, don't we just get run over? Is the topic I'm just going into. Because that really struck me too, listening to the gospel yesterday. Jesus said, when someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other one as well. Give to the one that asks of you, and do not turn your back on one that wants to borrow. You know, what kind of a foreign policy is that? And what kind of a way to live your life is that? Does this way of life work? Can it work? What happens when we actually choose to make ourselves vulnerable? What happens when we give to people who don't seem to deserve it? And a couple of stories came to mind. One is a personal story. The other is a story of a friend. Here's mine. This is how God works through us when we're generous to people, regardless of whether they deserve it. A couple of years ago, I really got it in my head that God was calling me to be more generous. So I'm working on that. Not too long after that, several people came up to me and my young daughter in the parking lot and said they really needed some money and asked if they could possibly paint over the cracked chips of paint on the edge of my car doors for money. And I went, well, you know, I'm not thrilled about this idea, but you know, I know God's called me to be generous, so I'm going to say yes. Well, what happened next was the lady pulls me aside and starts talking at me 100 miles an hour about everything and nothing. And I realized two things right away. Number one, she's probably on meth. Number two, she's trying to distract me. So I turn around, and what do I see? One of the guys she's with has taken out a can of red base coat spray paint and is spray painting the entire side of my lovely white car. Oh, no. And I'm just, and, huh? Oh yeah, it's an undercoat. So it's an undercoat. He follows it up with a can of white spray paint. Gets the car, gets some on the windows, gets the tires. It's ugly as all get out. You can see the red base coat right through it. It's a mess. And it was a lovely car. It was a lovely car. I loved that car. It wasn't a young mom car. It was like my dad's car. It was the big sedan with the leather seats and the climate control and the sunroof. It had a lot of years left in it, and now it was ugly as all get out. And because I did not want to make a scene and scare my daughter, and because on some level I still wanted to be generous, I smiled, said, I'm not pleased with your work, but I'll pay you anyway, and handed them the money and drove away. And as I drive home, I am so mad. I'm going, God, you told me to be generous, and you let this happen. What in the world do you think you're doing? You know, I figured, okay, I'm just an idiot. I just got my car all messed up, and I gave money to drug addicts. Wonderful. How much more can I screw this up? But God wasn't done with the story yet. I went home, told my husband the whole story, sure wasn't looking forward to that, and he said, you know, I'm proud of you. I know you've been working on generosity, and I would rather have a wife with a good heart than a good car. So keep it up, do it again. Don't let this get you down. And I'm like, oh. So we prayed for the con artists. We prayed a lot for the con artists, and I have no idea what happened to them. I'm going to assume that God used those prayers because he has a habit of doing that. But I know what happened to me next. So, a couple of months later, my husband and I decided we were going to get into foster parenting. But the big life change we needed to do that was to get rid of my car and get a minivan so we could haul around more kids. Now, a couple of months earlier, I would not have been willing to give up my car. I loved my car, but now I winced every time I saw it. I wanted that car gone. But we ran into another problem. Since it was a nice car that had been vandalized, it was still worth quite a bit of money, but we needed to pour money into to fix the paint job, and neither one of us could bring ourselves to do that. So we didn't know what to do with the car. It was worth about $7,000, and we needed that money so we could get a minivan now. But we couldn't sell it as is. We didn't want to fix the paint. We were just kind of stuck. We sat on that car a while. And finally it popped into my head, maybe we're supposed to give it away. And I went, but that doesn't make any sense, because we need the money for a new minivan. We need $7,000. But the thought wouldn't go away. Finally, I prayed to God and said, God, I think maybe you're calling us to give this car away. That doesn't make any sense. We need the money. So I'm going to ask for a really big sign. If you want us to give the car away, I would like you to pay for it. We need $7,000. If you can come up with some other sign, that's fine too. But the sign I'm asking for, if you want to do it, if you want to give me this sign, is $7,000. You give that to us, we'll give the car away. Thank you.
Bargain with God.
I totally bargained with God. Again, I was new to the whole idea of generosity. I'd never done this before. I shamelessly bargained with God. So, a few days after that, talking with some Middle Eastern refugees, and they mentioned a friend of theirs, another refugee that really needs a car. Well, gets the wheels turning in my head. And as my husband and I leave to go home, one of the refugees shouts after us, "And God bless your money!" I go, well, that's kind of a weird way to say goodbye. We climb into the car, and my husband says to me, "He did." And I went, "What? What happened?" He said, "Well, there's $3,000 in our account now, and I have no idea how it got there." And I went, "Really?" And, my husband is a meticulous money manager, and he tracked this down, and he called the bank, and he did everything. And he said, "The bank says it's always been there." We both knew full well the money hadn't always been there. And I went, "What's going on?" Frank said, "Well, get this." And he pulls the white sheet out of his pocket, and I just got a $4,000 raise. $7,000. And I went, and I told my husband about my prayer, and I said, "This means God's bought the car, and we need to give it away." And he laughed, and he said, "Oh, ye of little faith. I already knew we were giving the car away." As it turned out, God used that act of well-meaning generosity for good. My car got vandalized, but the con artists got prayed for to within an inch of their lives. My husband and I got money for a new minivan, which is what we needed, and I was able to give away my old car. And the old car went to a Sudanese refugee who's also a Christian pastor, and it now roams the streets giving away Bibles in Arabic and English to Muslims. So, my car is doing the work of the Lord. I'm so proud of it.
And you didn't have to fix it.
And I didn't even have to fix it.
Or look at it anymore.
Or look at it anymore. God worked everything out. It was kind of crazy. When we try to do things God's way and live generously, we get to see God work. I got my car vandalized, and yet everyone ended up blessed. God worked through it. So don't be afraid to go out on a limb and be generous. Here's the other story. I got permission from this couple to tell their story. This happened 2 months ago. Their names are Benny and Nancy, and they're from Yuma. They're in the Common Formation program with me. Benny is about to be ordained a deacon. Benny and Nancy, a few years back, needed some roof work done. And so they hired the worst roofer ever, a man named Valentine. He was an alcoholic. He was always falling asleep on the job, not coming in, doing awful work, working as slow as he could. A job that should have taken 1 month took him 9 months and took thousands of dollars more than it should have. Plus, they had been extra generous to Valentine the roofer because they were just that kind of people. He said he desperately needed money to pay his rent, and they gave him advances. They gave him several advances, and now the job was over and he owed them money. Plus, he'd done just a horrible job. They demanded he pay back the money. He had egregiously ripped them off. But then Valentine told his story. He didn't have the money. Probably he drank it away. He had nothing. His wife had recently walked out on him. His kids would barely talk to him. He was now unemployed, and he just lost the place where he was living. He'd been kicked out. He had nothing. He had nowhere to go. Benny and Nancy talked it over, and they offered to let him live in their trailer on their large farm property near Yuma while he worked off the money he owed them with odd jobs around the farm. Partly they felt sorry for him and wanted to be generous, and partly they just hoped to get some work out of him for the money they'd paid out. Valentine was an awful worker. Any job that should have taken a couple hours to do took him a week, but slowly and surely they were at least getting some work out of him. And Benny and Nancy treated him kindly. They did their best to forgive him. They did their best not to hold it against him. And you know what? He noticed. Over time, Valentine began to admire them. Valentine spent more time in their company. Valentine saw that they lived for Jesus, and he had a change of heart. And he started to live for Jesus too. And he started to change his life. And then Benny got very sick. I don't know the whole details, but it started with an infection of the bone in his foot, and the antibiotic they gave him to kill that infection killed his kidneys. So he was blind, he had total kidney failure, he couldn't walk, he was in desperate shape, his health was destroyed. And he went, well, I've got to quit the deacon program, there's no way I can become a deacon now. And he and his wife prayed, and every time a formation weekend came up, his sight would come back. And they took that as a sign that somehow he was supposed to continue in deacon formation. This made no sense to them, but they knew a miracle when they saw it. So Benny stayed in the program. And Valentine became his live-in caregiver. Valentine cooked his meals, cleaned the house, was the only one that could lift him. Benny's a big man, his wife couldn't lift him. So Valentine did the lifting, lifted Benny out of bed into a wheelchair, lifted him out of the wheelchair into the car. They never needed to hire a nurse because Valentine was there. And after many, many months, they told Valentine, you have more than paid off your debt to us. We can never repay you. You're free to go. You should get a job. You should restart your life again. Get someone that can pay you actual money. And he said, no, I don't want to go. You're my family now, and I want to be here with you, and I want to help you. And so Valentine stayed on. And one day, Valentine collapsed out in the fields. By the time they got him into the hospital, he had already suffered a massive stroke, and there was nothing they could do to reverse it. He died a few days later in the hospital, knowing Benny and Nancy were right there at his side. Now, Valentine had always wanted to give Benny a kidney, but it was impossible. Valentine was an older man, he was elderly, and he'd been an alcoholic his entire life. His body was wrecked. And also, what are the odds of him being a match? But the base of it was that his body was wrecked. Well, a couple hours after he died, the doctors came in and said to Benny and Nancy, we can't explain this, but his organs appear to be those of a much younger man, and they're in perfect condition, and he's a perfect match. We're prepping you for surgery. And so, Benny got Valentine's kidney. He recovered miraculously from the surgery. The doctor said they'd never seen anything like it. The guy that got Valentine's other kidney was still in bed on dialysis when Benny walked out of the hospital, drove to Tucson, and told us all his story. He was completely healed. Sight back, mobility back, everything. And he will be ordained a deacon this June. And it all started when they decided to give their awful roofer a second chance. And so Valentine found Christ, died with his new family at his side. Benny got a miraculous healing and gets to keep bringing others to Christ. It's astonishing the way God works through us when we make a point of being generous, especially when the other person doesn't seem to deserve it. Don't be afraid to be generous. God can work miracles. He can change you. He can change everyone around you. Amen?
Amen.
Last week we were challenged to do one of the following three things. Visit a lonely person, go to daily mass once, or write in a spiritual journal or a mass journal. Let's check in with each other and see how it all went.